Welcome to Galaxy Brains, the weekly podcast from Galaxy Research. I'm back with a rap and I've got a special feature. There's a new place for you to go to store your data on Bitcoin thanks to Casey Rodarmor. He's our guest and we'll just break down the topic. Is it good or bad? Will fees be rad? Can you even stop it? Do inscriptions conflict with the mission or the vision? Or are ordinals additive to the overall system? You decide while I ride on this crazy Game Boy beat. I deign to speak and let the words drip and creep. There's a dispute to inspect, some loot to collect. Who knew about this new use of Taproot to detect? Apparently no one, and some want you to have no fun. They say you're lying and tricking the code. They're shoguns, but hold on. We're flying close to the flames and we'll unpack it all today on Galaxy Brains. As always, I'm your host, Alex Thorne, head of firm-wide research of Galaxy Digital. Thank you for listening. We have a great show today. Casey Rodarmor, host of SF BitDevs, Bitcoin developer and creator of Ordinals, a new way to do NFTs and store data on Bitcoin that has the community buzzing. He is our guest. And we'll also check in with our friend Beimnet Abebe, as always, about markets and macro. Big day today, Fed with their rate decision. We'll get into it. But before we begin, I need to tell you to please refer to the link to the disclaimer on the podcast notes and note that none of the information contained in this podcast represents an investment advice, recommendation, offer, or solicitation by Galaxy Digital or any of its affiliates to buy or sell any securities. Galaxy Brains, we're ready to go. Let's hop right into it. Let's go now to our friend Beimnet Abebe from Galaxy Digital Trading. As always, my friend, good to see you.
Thank you for having me.
Big day today.
Absolutely.
Wednesday, February 1st. It's not January anymore. Wow, month two. A new monthly candle started. The Federal Reserve, FOMC, I guess was the meeting today. Certainly they put out their decision on rates today. What happened?
Yes, the FOMC decision came out today. The Fed hiked rates by 25 basis points. They guided that they are likely to do more hikes in the future. Powell had a press conference as well after the statement was released. I think the press conference was fairly dovish, and the market is interpreting it as dovish. Essentially, he had to acknowledge the fact that the inflation data has started to turn. There are constructive developments in the labor market. They had employment cost index that came out yesterday. That was a little softer. And so there's a lot of things that are suggesting that you have sort of a Goldilocks situation where you have prices coming down and employment not ticking up that high. Unemployment right. Ticking up that high. And so basically the market and the Fed kind of make it seem like Goldilocks is in really within reach.
It's in reach, the soft landing.
Soft landing, however you want to think about it.
Yeah, prime.
And then you couple that with an insane level of under positioning in risk assets. We're talking. I was telling guys this on the floor, but you're talking about trillions of dollars that are defensively positioned. That all of a sudden, the world's most important central bank and the most important central banker basically gave you a green light to buy risk assets today. And
does he think that?
He knows it.
He knows it.
He knows it.
Yeah.
They're too smart. They watch the price action.
They know.
He basically, when he walked into the press conference today, he had a decision to make. Do I get so aggressive enough where I need, I try to take stocks down?
Yeah, mean talk following a soft raise.
But he got asked a question about stocks. Literally was the first question asked.
At the moment,
It wasn't that. It was I forgot the exact specifics, but it was basically financial conditions are easing. That's counterproductive to your goal of slowing down inflation. How are you thinking about them? And basically he gave a nonchalant answer that, monetary policy works with a lag. They're monitoring a number of things. And we'll see how that stuff develops. So essentially, he didn't take the opportunity to be no, stocks need to be 5% low. They'll never say that.
But he said something like that at a previous one.
Yeah, basically, a reporter in two FOMC meetings ago, I believe, told him that stocks and bonds were rallying during the meeting, and he proceeded to literally talk through 5 talking points about why stocks and bonds shouldn't
be rallying. Yeah.
And so there's a very different tone. You could tell that there was definitely a change, not a pivot, but a sort of a movement along towards Goldilocks, soft landing, and less hawkish rhetoric. And you could see it not only in the text and what he's actually saying, but his demeanor, how he was thinking about inflation. The tone was just so different, right? It's really tough to appreciate these things unless you are a consistent follower. But markets don't lie. They're ripping like crazy. NASDAQ's up 3% here. We had some company earnings that were reported after the bell today, and stocks will only continue to rally thereafter. I mean, Bitcoin, as we speak, is testing 23,800.
Yeah.
And I think, this move probably has some more room to run. I'm thinking probably something along the lines of like 4,300 in S&P. That's 150 plus points away. Probably at least 25K on Bitcoin. I don't even know where the offer side is on Bitcoin. Who on earth would be selling risk assets right now when the majority of the world's money managers are underweight risk assets and they're being told to buy them by the most important central bank? Like, why is there an offer on that? So unless you're taking profit. So I'm about as bullish as I've been. On a however scale you want to do it.
At least in the last several months, yeah.
Yes. Basically, the number one rule in markets is don't fight the Fed.
And the Fed is telling you what to do here.
Fed is like they didn't tell you to sell stocks, which means you have to buy them. Because if you're not long it, you're short it. In my head, at least.
Yeah. And
the way I would describe it is basically you have every single person that's investing assets in the world looking at their portfolios today and looking at, holy shit, am I long the stuff that's been moving up the most? And the answer is I'm not long enough of that stuff.
Yeah.
If you're a bond manager and you have liabilities going out 10 plus years and you're sniffing that the Fed might be slowing down or cutting, and you're like, oh my God, this might be my last opportunity to buy bonds on a 4 handle. Oh my God, this might be my last opportunity to buy bonds on a 3 handle. If you miss that opportunity now, it will cost you for decades to come. If you're a reserve manager,
you're buying long-dated stuff.
Yeah. Like the 10-year bonds can go from 340 to like 250 so quickly. So quickly.
Yeah.
And if you miss that and you're a huge bond manager, you're like, that's your whole job.
Yeah. You had one job.
One job, and that's to, buy bonds when they were reasonably cheap, because what have we known about bonds is they were in a 40-year bull market. They only go down. You're going to be hunting for yield in about a year and a half.
Yeah.
And if you don't get it now, it's like, and then same thing. It's like there's so many trades. Like everyone on the planet got long dollars last year and is still overweight dollars. And they're trying to get into trades like long euro or short dollar yen, and you're just not getting the opportunities. Like, I mean, euro's, I think, testing like 110 right now. You got Bank of England that's about to be hawkish tomorrow. Like, it could be a 112 by the end of the week, and you're a reserve manager that put all your money in dollars and you haven't twitched yet. And it's the magnitude and the pace of these moves are going to catch people off sides. I think, for me, keep it simple. Buy risk assets. Buy convexity in risk assets. And, it's time.
Wow, it's come a long way. I mean, we were talking, I remember us talking in June. You said you hadn't been this bearish in a long time. Then you got bullish in July. Then we've sort of been, trucking along here through the fall, which, in crypto had idiosyncratic events that impacted it. Bitcoin and ETH ran all of January, sort of like almost a reversion to where they should have been.
Yeah.
And you think there's still room to run?
Absolutely. It's just a simple function of like what does risk reward look like in these assets. If you look at Bitcoin, if it's floored at 20K, you are like 15% from 20K.
This is the downside.
This is the downside. What are you? Are you going to go short it to try to make 15% on an asset that has no upside?
And it was already down a lot.
It's already down a lot.
Yeah.
Like, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
And then at 23K, you're like, this is an asset that's traded at 68K before.
Right.
And it's risk on. Like, whoa.
Right.
And then you're like, okay, what's been doing well this year? Well, Bitcoin's up 40%, has one of the best risk-adjusted returns out there. It trades over $30 billion a day, deeply liquid spot and derivatives
Global.
market. Like, shit.
Should be on the radar.
There are people probably freaking out right now. And I'm using the PG words to it. Especially anybody that's in crypto world that's benchmarked to an index that is crypto, full crypto, no cash in it.
Yeah.
I bet you most people are underperforming.
Yeah.
You couldn't have been full length or
you're not going to be all
levered at the start of the year.
Basically all Bitcoin and ETH and some smaller
even
cap
the alts,
stuff.
but still, like if you're like measuring your returns versus the stuff, like you're underweight.
Yeah.
you're forced to chase here. You're a dip buyer.
Yeah. Interesting.
I mean, I think stuff's on the wrong handles. I'm you know, I gotta calm down.
It's a big day. It's your Super Bowl.
It is a big day, and like you have to remember rules and try not to get emotional. Like buying at the highs is normally a very stupid thing in markets, especially in mean reverting ones. But I have to say this does feel a bit different. You are taking out significant resistance levels and support levels in traditional markets. The brakes are there. The catalyst is there. That's all you need.
Yeah.
Like though all of markets really comes down to a chart and a story, and both of those things looking good right now.
Beimnet Abebe from Galaxy Digital Trading. As always, my friend, thank you so much.
No problem.
Let's go now to our guest, Casey Rodarmor, open source developer, creator of Ordinals on Bitcoin Inscriptions. These new, I'm going to call them NFTs, but he's going to correct me, I'm sure. Casey, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here. I'm a huge fan of the pod. Very happy to hear that maybe the Alex Thorn wraps are going to be showing up on chain. Who can say?
We can't confirm it yet, but it is possible if you go to ordinals.com where you can inspect these Bitcoin NFTs.
These digital artifacts.
These digital
Alex,
artifacts.
Not just NFTs.
Thank you. These digital artifacts. I don't think anyone has uploaded an MP3 yet there, but that could happen.
I wonder. I think there maybe are some. There's so many now.
Yeah,
not so many. There's like 500 or something. But if you keep hitting previous on the inscriptions page,
I got to go in and look.
I think, because I think that there was a couple maybe like songs about Bitcoin. I think there's a sea shanty about Bitcoin.
Oh, sick.
Yeah.
Those sea shanties are hilarious.
The community is so young, but the memes are already very strong. The meming potential is enormous.
It really is, and people are putting they put some iconic Udi Wertheimer tweets up there. There's some Bitcoin punks, it looks like, that are getting made. I saw some other collection I don't know the name of, but clearly it's a collection that's being put up. There's plenty of like true one-of-ones. There's text. The rare Pepes are back.
The rare Pepes are back. Yeah, it's really hard for me to tell what's original and what is like a copy or a derivative. There is definitely a lot of copies of things, people just uploading old stuff. So, if you see something, it doesn't necessarily mean that the person who made it uploaded it. But it's wild. This has been exploding. Like I thought we were going to do this mainnet release. I think it was like January 20th, maybe. And then like some people would like, use it and like a dog would bark off in the distance. And then we would like go back to like just grinding in the open source salt mines, for like more features.
Yeah.
But it basically has been completely insane. And I think part of that is like this sort of like quote unquote controversy over like how it's been being used. And I mean, one thing is like when I first saw some people criticizing the project, I was like, oh, like I feel bad, like people don't like me on the internet. And then I realized that they were like blasting out the project to their like hundreds of thousands of followers. And now like, I just embrace the haters. I want to deal with the criticism. There's a lot of, people have reasonable concerns. But yeah, just a hint, like if you don't like it, don't mention to your hundreds of thousands of followers that you shouldn't put monkey JPEGs in the blockchain because they might do just that.
Yeah, it's the Streisand effect, I guess, and I completely agree. I think it's and we'll take it back. You know what? Let's step back for our audience. Let's explain what we're really talking about here. So I'll set it up, but then you take it from there, Casey. So there is now a way that was not previously possible, and we'll talk about why, to store arbitrary data on Bitcoin in larger amounts than had previously been possible, large enough amounts on-chain for things like images and documents, right? And Casey, who built Ordinals, which is this way to do that, these inscriptions, they're called, it's gotten a lot of discussion in the community over the last week and a half or so because it's a new use for Bitcoin, but it also perhaps was an unintended use and byproduct of the Taproot upgrade, and that's causing some controversy. But before we get into the controversy and the sort of big ideas, tell us again what it is and how it works, Casey.
Sure. Yeah. So there's basically two layers to Ordinals and inscriptions. So the lower layer is Ordinals, or the Ordinal protocol, or Ordinal Theory, which I call it when I'm like kind of being tongue in cheek. And Ordinal Theory is just a convention for numbering individual Satoshis in the order in which they are mined, and then tracking them across transactions. This is a purely opt-in convention. It's sort of a different way of viewing the data that's already on the chain. And so this gives individual sats an identity and lets somebody say like, oh, I hold this sat, and send it to other people, secure it with a private key, send it in a transaction. And that is sort of the lower level that inscriptions are based on. And then inscriptions are a way of assigning content to an individual sat. So you include the inscription content, which is basically any file that you can view in a web browser. You include it in the witness, which is this part of a Bitcoin transaction. You mine that block, and that content gets assigned to the first sat in the first output of that transaction. And because the sats are transferable using the Ordinal Theory protocol, which is just based on normal Bitcoin transactions. It's not a side chain. It's not a token. You just need to make these kind of like, you kind of control the order and value of the inputs and outputs to get the sats to line up where you want them to go.
Yep.
That turns these sats into something that I kind of think the term NFT is like very overloaded and very weird. And there are things that people call NFTs that are not immutable and that are not decentralized and whatever. So I use the term digital artifacts for inscriptions. And that is just an NFT that is immutable, an NFT that is uncensorable, an NFT that doesn't have like security vulnerabilities or like a backdoor key. So then by making these inscriptions, by inscribing these sats, you can create these digital artifacts, which you can see on ordinals.com.
Yeah, very cool. And so when you talk about the ordinal like theory and the protocol, this ordering of the sats themselves, right? That's it's a native Bitcoin functionality, but I imagine that it's the wallet itself that has to be really like used to. I mean, it's not even UTXO selection at this point, right? It's something even more granular.
Yeah, I call it like sat selection or sat control. And to be clear, this ordinal protocol is not part of the Bitcoin base layer. It's really just an accident of the way that Bitcoin works that enables you to view it from this lens. And pretty interestingly, I started thinking about this in early 2022. And the reason that I made this thing is I've made digital art in the past, like generative algorithmic art, and NFTs never really appealed to me. But when I started seeing these very cool, creative, algorithmic art NFTs, I was like, oh, like, okay, this is the kind of stuff that I make. I should be able to, make these. But I couldn't kind of feel good about making Ethereum NFTs for a variety of reasons, variety of like technical reasons. And so I wanted to create something that was on Bitcoin that had sort of these better properties. And so that was when I started thinking about it in early 2022. Kind of came up with this ordinals idea because I needed a way to assign, like Bitcoin doesn't have accounts. It just has UTXOs, and UTXOs are created and destroyed. So you need some place for the NFTs to like live on. So I kind of came up with ordinals to have a place for the NFTs to live on chain. And then when I finished the idea of ordinals, I thought like, oh, these are like serial numbers for sats. And then I typed in serial numbers for sats into Google, and I found a post on Bitcoin Talk from 2012 where somebody described the scheme exactly that I had come up with. So it's not part of the base layer, but in some way, I didn't create the ordinals protocol. I kind of discovered it,
Yeah. Yeah, it's something that could be done. Let's talk about the witness data, because I think this is in some ways perhaps at the core of the controversy. You might have to correct me on this, but there's two main things here, both a Taproot and a Segwit story. And with Taproot, I guess there's a way to encode additional arbitrary data in the witness, in the signature part of the transaction.
So, well, the thing is that arbitrary data storage has always been possible on Bitcoin. First in op returns, and actually, so the inscription content, it goes in the witness, which is a new part of a transaction that was introduced in Segwit. But it would have been possible to do the same thing before Segwit, even before Segwit, just more inconveniently and with more like limits. Segwit introduced the witness and gave it a discount relative to other parts of the transaction, which was done for a few reasons. But it still had a lot of limitations on the witness. In particular, I believe these were all essentially policy limitations where they couldn't be above a certain size, et cetera. And then Taproot removed those limitations. Now, I think the really important thing to keep in mind about like sort of the controversy is that these limitations on Segwit witnesses and on pay-to-script hash scripts beforehand were not put in place to limit the amount of data that could go into a transaction. They were there for other technical reasons. So, for example, I know for sure that the early limit on pay-to-script hash scripts, which would have been another way to store data, that was there due to this exponential increase in the cost of processing a transaction when you had a very large transaction with very many inputs. And so that limit was there, among other reasons for that. And there were a whole bunch of other reasons to have those limits. But those eventually changes were made to Bitcoin that made it safe to remove those limits. And those limits caused issues, particularly for transaction construction. Imagine you're trying to construct a Bitcoin transaction and you have all these goals. You want to send somebody some sats, you want to include something in the script, you want to do some locking stuff. And everything that could possibly make that transaction invalid is sort of a pitfall that you have to avoid. So these limits were put in place for technical reasons that don't involve storing arbitrary data on chain. And they were lifted because those technical reasons were no longer a worry. And so, I don't think it's fair to say that this is coming as a surprise to some people who didn't really understand why those limitations were there in the first place and don't really understand why they were lifted. But if you ask a lot of the Bitcoin developers involved with those decisions and how they were thinking about it, they go, oh yeah, like people stuffing arbitrary stuff on Bitcoin is kind of a fact of life. We just want to make sure that it doesn't mess up the system in other ways. And we lifted those limitations because the original reasons that they existed simply no longer applied. And those reasons weren't about preventing arbitrary data storage.
I see. Yeah, there's some discussion that I guess the op-return field where you can also store arbitrary data for a transaction, it used to allow a significantly larger amount of data, right? Like, was it 10,000 bytes at one point? I mean, this is maybe a decade ago. And then it was reduced to 80 bytes, which is, I think, where it currently is. Which is enough to say store a hash that references some kind of off-chain data. That's how Omni layer worked, where Tether was first issued, Counterparty, and I think, certainly that piece of junk Veriblock that was spamming transactions using op-return for a long time. But putting data in the witness, though, there is, like you said, no longer a limit, and that's one of the things that enables sort of, I'm going to call it more robust data to be stored, bigger data, like images.
More data, cheaper, less gotchas, more efficient. Yeah, I mean, so one thing about the op-return and the controversy there, which is sort of unique to op-return, is that by default, before people were using op-return, or let me just say, op-return uses the script pub key, is in the script pub key of a transaction, and that is the locking script. And because that output with that locking script has to go into the UTXO set, it means that very large locking scripts are a burden on full nodes because they enter the UTXO set, and the UTXO set needs to be small and fast. And so in order to... So the initial problem is people were encoding data in outputs, and that data was going into the UTXO set. And op-return was sort of like a harm minimization way, where when a full node seeds an op-return, it knows that nobody will ever be able to spend that because it marks that as invalid. It immediately says can't spend it. And so as a result, full nodes have special code in them that will remove op-return outputs from the UTXO set, special code that recognizes that template. And they also made it standard up to a certain number of bytes. Bitcoin has these like standardist rules that mostly determine what the network will relay. And they made op-return with up to 80 bytes a standard transaction type and added the special code to prune it from the UTXO set. The witness, on the other hand, is input data. it authorizes a transaction for being spent. And so as a result, it has no possibility of entering the UTXO set. So there's no code that's needed to ensure that these inscriptions don't enter the UTXO set. And also, a lot of people are talking about the fact that that the witness gets this discount, the 75% off. And that's because for a lot of reasons, the witness is very low impact data on the network. It does take up block space, but full nodes basically download it and verify it, and then they never have to look at it again. And when it's buried below a certain height, Bitcoin Core has this setting called assume valid, where below that block height, it won't even look at them. It'll just be like, okay, yeah, like whatever, I'm sure they're fine. They're buried by so much work that it's no problem. And so that means that, inscriptions will be downloaded by full nodes, but after a certain point, they won't even be, and right now they're being skipped. They're like processed, but skipped. Full nodes won't even look at them. So that they're sufficiently buried.
That's one of the criticisms, right? Was that I've heard and seen on Bitcoin Twitter was that this increases the burden on full nodes. And you're saying it because it's not in the UTXO set. It doesn't need to be pruned. It literally isn't in the UTXO set. And also, the nodes still do have to download the block data, but blocks could be full for any number of reasons. This doesn't increase the total possible block size.
Yeah. One very important point is that Bitcoin's security model requires that blocks be full. So for as the subsidy, the new coins created in every block gets cut in half every 4 years, we become increasingly reliant on fee revenue to pay for chain security. And this is something that if it were not true that blocks needed to be full, I would be much less cavalier about inscriptions.
Right.
You could, if there was some future where Bitcoin could be secure and blocks could be often empty, then I would say, okay, like maybe there is some possibility that inscriptions will increase the expected future size of the chain. But because blocks must be full, it's true that more transactions on Bitcoin leads to bigger blocks. But sort of as you zoom out, blocks need to be full anyways, so this doesn't increase the long-term, size of the chain.
Yeah, you could be positive on this if you're on the security budget question, the long-term Bitcoin question. Miners are positive on it already. Of course, they want fees.
Yep.
But that I think one of the criticisms is like, okay, so nodes still have to download it in the beginning, and there's some bandwidth cost. But to your point, I mean, if we assume blocks have to be full anyway, it's no premium to that. But should it be getting the Segwit discount? In fact, should the Segwit discount even exist anymore? The witness discount. Let me start. Why was that added? Because I was looking into this. And the best I can tell is that it was just to incentivize people to use Segwit, basically, and theoretically make it cheaper for like Lightning opens and closes, which use Segwit.
Yeah, actually, I don't think that that's the case. The discount was added for a few reasons, and I haven't heard like incentivize people to use Segwit as one of them. One is there was a desire for a block size increase. So the Segwit upgrade was a block size increase.
Right.
And if Segwit data was not given this discount, we could have kept the block size at 1 megabyte total by not giving these Segwit bytes a discount. And then, blocks, old nodes would see blocks partially full, and new nodes would see that difference between what the old nodes saw and the new nodes saw made up by the witnesses. But so there was a desire for a block size increase, and that's one of the reasons why the witness was given a discount, because it was a way, just a technical hack to do a block size increase as a soft fork.
Yep.
Another reason was to encourage people to clean up their UTXOs. So witness data, if you have a transaction and the more inputs it has, the larger the witness data will be, because for each input, you need a witness. So transactions that are relatively witness heavy are transactions that remove more items from the UTXO set, which decreases the long-term burden on full nodes. So there was to incentivize cleaning up the UTXO set. And certainly, they did not intend to incentivize monkey JPEGs on the blockchain. But a third reason is that is this low impact aspect of the witness, that it's verified once and then it's thrown away. It's not verified at all below assume valid. Pruned nodes already deleted. And also in the distant future, we might want to do something called witness pruning. And I don't really understand the technical arguments for and against this. But because witness data is sort of separate from the rest of the transaction, and in particular because it's not covered by the transaction hash, we could say, okay, witness data from like 10 years ago, we're just not even, you can boot a full node and it will have a mode where it won't even look at the old witnesses because they're no longer needed. And in that case, it wouldn't download them at all. So it's actually 3 reasons why the witness discount was given. Technical hack to increase the block size, which was seen as desirable. Encourage people to clean up old UTXOs, and it's low impact. So like inscriptions definitely don't fit with the spirit of the second one because they don't clean up old UTXOs. You can stick a lot of rare Pepes in an inscription and not clean up any UTXOs, but they do kind of fit with the second and first, that it's a general block size increase and that it's low impact on the network and on full nodes.
Fascinating. Okay, couple questions. Let's talk. We'll table some of the controversy for now. I may ask you 1 or 2 questions more at the end of the interview about that. But let's talk about inscriptions and what your plans are now for Ordinals.com. I mean, listeners can go to Ordinals.com, Ordinals.com, and see what people are inscribing. You can get all the technical docs and the link to the wallet on GitHub that you can use with your full node to do your own inscribing. Do you have any plans, or have you talked to like the full node, like self-hosted provider, the Umbrels and the MyNodes and those guys to make this?
Oh, sure, yeah. And just to be clear, and thank you for shilling Ordinals.com,
yes.
Ordinals.com. But that's also that's just the underlying binary, the binary that like does everything is a wallet and a block explorer called Ord. And when you go to Ordinals.com, you're just talking to my copy of Ord running on a computer somewhere. I think possibly in Helsinki. I don't know, somewhere in Europe because it's cheaper over there.
Yeah.
And so you can run that locally and you can see exactly what is on Ordinals.com. Like no different. So I just want to emphasize that it's it's open source software. Cool. It's very decentralized. You just need a full node and you need this binary, and it is command line only, but we're trying as hard as possible to make it easy to run. And so, that is actually one thing, for the future. Like we want people to run full nodes, and in some future, maybe we want like something like a light client, and you could build a light client given the protocol. But I'm very happy that people are running full nodes. So a big priority right now is basically just like tech support. People are like, how Bitcoin? And we're like, okay, like Bitcoin D, like let's go.
Yeah.
And then inscriptions already have a lot of great properties. So when you go to Ordinals.com, you can know that everything you see is immutable and everything you see is entirely on chain. So you don't need to audit them individually. They're not smart contracts that could have vulnerabilities. You don't need to look where the data is stored. It's on the Bitcoin blockchain.
Yep.
And for future features, we have a lot of stuff that we want to add. One sort of hole in the feature set is there's really no way of doing collections or a good kind of provenance where you can see like who made a collection and like what somebody's body of work are. And so we have a design for adding that where you'll be able to use an inscription as the parent for other inscriptions by making a transaction
actually
that
linking
includes
them
it
basically.
Exactly. Yeah. And then this gives you this tree of inscriptions. So you could make an inscription representing you. And then like every, week you could put out the Galaxy wrap, the Galaxy Brains wrap as an inscription. And people would be able to see that you had made it. And they would be able to know that because, the Alex inscription had been used and authorized, that only you could have made that child inscription. Cool. Yeah. And then that's like infinite recursion and like nesting, and you can do just these trees of inscriptions. Many crazy features.
So you can go and see on Ordinals.com someone's been minting a lot of these rare Pepes, and I think those are just the old rare Pepe images, right? They're just putting those up. But then they put up an inscription saying it was all text that was a link to every transaction ID and said like rare Pepe number 1, rare Pepe. So they're kind of trying to do
provenance
without your nested hierarchy.
Life finds a way, you know. The users will hack it together. Yeah, and a lot of this is very much like user-driven development. I have random ideas about what I think is important, but ultimately it's what users want and it's what they're running into. One fun thing is that the ordinals.com, like the protocol, you can put any kind of content you want because they're identified by a content type, also known as a MIME type, which is just a string of text, like image/PNG, image or text/plain. But there's nothing stopping users from putting whatever kind of content they want. And as users have been uploading new kinds of content, I've been figuring out how to support that in the front end. And so I call these like illicit inscriptions. And then, you know, so somebody inscribed a PDF of the Bitcoin white paper. And so I had to figure out like, okay, well, you know, for technical reasons, we can't sandbox this effectively. So we have to use a JavaScript library to render it. And I wrote that and we pushed the code out. And to be clear, this isn't just me. There's also a small cadre of dedicated open source contributing degens. And we got that code up, and now you can go the PDF that the person inscribed, you now see the preview of the first page when you go to the inscription page. Cool. And then you can jump in and get the content.
Yeah, so the data is there. I could download the data. I could use my own way to render it or whatever. The literal like bytes are there for the data and the MIME type. But you're saying like on the front end itself, like there wasn't a PDF viewer, right? Or you know, if someone puts an MP3 up, like you need like an MP3 player to actually like play it on the site. Or
yeah, you need to you need to notice the content type and be like, okay, this is an image, so it needs to go in an image tag, or this is a MP3 and this needs to go in an audio tag, or for example, this is HTML or SVG, which gets rendered inside of an iframe.
Right.
And for that, we have a lot of weird considerations, like it has to be sandboxed and all that. But yeah, so you're exactly right about how it works.
Cool. So a couple other questions. Is it possible to build a decentralized exchange or marketplace for inscriptions? And let's start even before decentralized. Let's just say an exchange before, ideally decentralized. But like, could we have an open
let's just go right into decentralized.
All right, let's do it.
Let's just go right into decentralized. So actually, the technology is not done yet. To be clear, a lot of the stuff I'm talking about is not done. Just requires some of the old elbow grease. But because because these inscriptions ride on sats, and you can do sort of normal Bitcoin transactions that transfer one sat to another, you can do atomic swaps from BTC to an inscription. And the way that this will eventually work is, you know, you make an inscription that you want to sell, and then you create what's called an offer. And an offer is a partially signed Bitcoin transaction that is not valid because it has your inscription on it that goes into one of the inputs, and you sign for that. And also on one of the outputs, you pay yourself, say, 1 Bitcoin. And the only way that transaction can be made valid is by somebody putting their 1 Bitcoin into one of the other inputs, signing for it, and then broadcasting it to the rest of the network. And so this gives us a really nice primitive that we can use to build basically a decentralized, I don't even know if I should call it a market or an exchange, because it's really just you create these partially signed transactions, and then you put them wherever. You post them on Twitter, you post them on Nostr, you staple them to a telephone pole, you paste them in Discord, et cetera. They can be relayed in any sort of way. In fact, if we really wanted to, Ord could have sort of like a P2P network where they would trade these offer files. And then the person who is sort of authorized to sell the inscription, who owns the inscription, just completes it and then broadcasts it to the Bitcoin network. And this is one really nice thing about ordinals and inscriptions is they really fit in nicely with the rest of Bitcoin. So all this existing infrastructure we can leverage. All this stuff about partially signed transactions we can leverage. It's really it's kind of like caveman technology. Like it's just the simplest thing that can work. So yeah, decentralized trades or like trustless offers. Should be coming soon / eventually.
So soon, TM. I love that. I love the use of the PSBT here. I had been just thinking in my head, like you could maybe with like a DLC, you could get it done, some kind of some kind of multi-sig escrow with the buyer and an oracle as 1 and 2, and then the seller or somebody comes in as 3. There's definitely ways. I would love to see that. I'd love to see the wallets integrate this. Really, I guess it's primarily SAT selection that they have to integrate, right? To really make this
SAT selection, SAT control. Yep. And then looking at these old transactions and so the way the many options for wallets to do it. It's actually not such a heavy lift for existing infrastructure because it's using the normal transactions that they're already processing, the normal signatures. For example, we use Bitcoin Core. The Ord wallet is really just a wrapper around Bitcoin Core. And we use Bitcoin Core for all the transaction signing, some transaction construction, transaction broadcast, propagation, et cetera.
Yep.
So people with existing Bitcoin infrastructure should take a look and see if this is something that they want to support.
Yeah, everyone should definitely give it a shot, first of all, because it's a very, very novel use case on Bitcoin. I agree. I am surprised and impressed by the elegant integration with Bitcoin, right? How simple this is. And but the people are mad. Luke Dash Jr. said that you were lying and tricking the code to make this work, which I find to be quite a humorous statement because the code is the code and you're just using it. So, and we've seen some other people, frankly, be very upset. They don't want their chain bloated with this arbitrary stuff, they say.
Yep.
What's your general pushback on that?
I guess my general pushback on those kind of very general criticisms, I'm very happy I probably have better answers to more specific criticisms, but those general criticisms that are of the form that like Bitcoin is not for this, don't really do much for me. I think Bitcoin is a system and we should use the system in the way that benefits us, and people should find ways to use it that are good and which don't hurt the system. And that it's not something that's for something or for other people, for some things and not for other things. It's essentially transcended the intentions of its original creator. And I think a lot of the Bitcoin devs really see themselves as caretakers and not really sort of people who are going to say what the protocol is used for. So sort of general criticisms of the form like Bitcoin is not for monkey pictures are like, well, I don't know. Some people like the monkey pictures. They want to trade the rocks. They want to trade the Bitcoin rocks. They pay their fees, which kind of indicates that they find these transactions valuable.
The transactions themselves are valid on chain, like they're correctly constructed and they pay their way.
Exactly.
Yeah. I have to say I found the debate to be quite humorous overall, especially over something that is a totally valid use case. Or use of the network, right? You didn't break anything. You didn't change, just use the code that was there. But also for something so fun and something that can be so silly. By the way, we talk about, it's true for NFTs in general also, but for inscriptions, like, yes, people are mostly, it looks like, putting JPEGs up there, but there could be a lot of other uses for this. You could imagine.
I'm really excited. We can do really good support for essentially multi-file inscriptions, where you make inscriptions and they're just files that the web server can return to you. And then you make other inscriptions which reference the content of those inscriptions. This is not functionality that exists. Again, this is in the soon TM category, but the whole model was really designed to be very compatible with the web. And I think that you're just going to have this on-chain like library of images and code and HTML and CSS and all these other like web resources. And you'll be able to do like collages and remixing. And like if you're doing an inscription and you have like a JavaScript library that you need, if that's in an inscription, then other people can use it in the future in their inscriptions. So that's actually what I'm most excited about for myself as like somebody who loves the web, loves web content, loves the browser, and has made like a bunch of silly, weird like web art. I'm really excited to give a platform where people can explore this very weird new medium.
I really like it. I think it's very exciting. There's a lot of creativity that's clearly going to come from this. We've got to wrap it up here. Casey Rodarmor, creator of Ordinals and Inscriptions on Bitcoin. Thank you so much for coming, Casey.
Thank you so much. I encourage people to check out the project. I couldn't do it without other people's help. So, find some code, comment, and thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you, Casey. That's all for this episode of Galaxy Brains. Thank you so much to our guest, Beimnet Abebe, as always, to talk about markets. And thank you to our special guest, Casey Rodarmor, Bitcoin developer, host of SF BitDevs, and creator of Ordinals on Bitcoin. If you want to learn more about Ordinals, you can follow him on Twitter and listen to his podcast, The Hell Money Pod. And also, we'll be covering Ordinals at Galaxy Research, and you can see all of our content at galaxy.com/research. That's all we have this week. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening to Galaxy Brains, the weekly podcast from Galaxy Research. If you enjoy the show, please like, rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. To follow Galaxy Research, sign up for our weekly newsletter at gdr.email, read our content at galaxy.com/research, and follow us on Twitter at GLXYResearch. See you next week.